Everybody. We've got a few more minutes, so we're going to give people a few more minutes to file in. So continue to make yourselves comfortable. Relax outside of the heat. It's not too hot today. It is actually nice. Well, you're talking to somebody who spent the last 4 days in Orlando. Yeah. You've been to Orlando, I can see. So my seatmate on the airplane coming out here turns to me. We're coming out to Orlando. We're flying to Orlando, and I'm chatting with my seatmate, and he turns to me and says, "Why would anybody be going to Orlando in the middle of July?" To which I had two thoughts. The first thought is, well, pal, unless you have a parachute and a plan, you're going to the same place. So you could probably answer the question yourself. But the second is, he had told me he was a photojournalist and he was coming back from Ukraine. And I would have thought coming back from Ukraine, you'd be happy to be going anywhere. But then as I tried to go outside at 7 o'clock in the morning to take a walk, it was already 85 degrees, 90% humidity. And there were signs on the path every 50 feet to look out for alligators. And I remembered, I was thinking back to my conversation with the guy on the plane, and I thought to myself, well, the man has a point. So I went back inside. I was already drenched. I'd only walked about 200 yards, not my usual like 6 miles. So yeah, Orlando was kind of miserable. And then it rained every single day. And then this is even crazier. So I'm giving a speech at our state association in Florida, and I'm in a large ballroom. And two things happened that I've never had happen giving a speech before. The first is that a fire alarm goes off in the middle of my speech. And at first I don't know if it's a joke because I've never had this happen before. So I'm standing there looking at an audience, and I think there were, I don't know, probably 400 or so people in the audience. And we realized it's not a joke. So everyone has to file out of the auditorium, wait 15 minutes in the heat in Orlando, and then file back in. And then I get back on the stage and I resume my talk, and it's dripping on me. And finally I said to the audience, am I imagining this or am I getting rained on? And they said, oh yeah, you know, when it's this humid outside, water condenses on the ceiling and it drips. I thought, I have got to get back to California. So that's a long-winded way of saying I am very glad to be with you all at the terraces today.
Well, before we get officially started, Kendall, can you strike the plan to pull the fire alarm mid presentation, please?
That is my new go-to plan for. No, my plan today. Now, some of you were having lunch with me, and I had to leave lunch because I've been on the road for a week and a half, which is a little unusual. So a week ago, Monday, I left on this trip, and I realized when I got here last night, I needed to do some laundry. So I've done some laundry and I've got clothes in the dryer. And I said, you got to excuse me. I've got to get my clothes out of the dryer. And no one believed me. But here's the thing, they're still damp. So if I get up in the middle of the presentation and head for the door, it's because I hear the dryer alarm and I've got to go.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here for our community chat. As always, this is one of the highlights of my month, and it's always engaging and lively discussions. Numbers are a little higher than usual. I'm not totally sure why, but it may be because of the gentleman to my right. Yeah, guest speaker. So we actually have a few guests with us today. We have over here to my left, Andy, if you want to wave or stand. Andy McDonald is our Chief Financial Officer for Human Good. So he's with us for the day. Welcome, Andy. Thank you for being here. If you have any...
And so I've got to add in, by the way, that in 30 years, Andy is the best CFO I've worked with. he has made material changes in the last few years to refinance certain debt that we had as an organization, restructure debt where we could take advantage of what were then, not now, then historically low interest rates. So thanks to a lot of the work that Andy's done, we're on very solid financial footing as an organization. And that's terrifically important in any circumstance, to be on solid financial footing. But I think it's especially as important as we look on the road ahead for the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. As I told some members of our board and advisory boards this morning, I'm anticipating some degree of economic turbulence ahead. And hopefully it doesn't materialize. Hopefully we don't see recessionary pressures. Hopefully we don't see some of the continuing wage pressures that we've seen in the last 18 months or so. But if we do, we're very well prepared to meet those things in large part to the work that Andy's done, Andy and his team.
Also in the back of the room, we have Debbie Gonzalez, who's our Vice President of Operations. Wave one more time, Debbie. Thank you for being here, Debbie. And just strolled into the back of the room casually, James Park, who's our Senior Vice President of Communications for Human Good. And I believe James is
here to make sure I don't go materially off message. That's why James is here. James keeps me out of trouble, or mostly tries to keep me out of trouble.
And James takes better notes than any of us. So we're glad that James is here with us. And then also, obviously, we have John Cochran here with us, who is President and CEO of Human Good. A couple of quick items, and then I will shut my mic off and make sure John stays on. So immediately following this, you're going to see a lot of activity out in the Galleria. Every month we do a team member appreciation event. And it just so happens that we are doing our team member appreciation event today. And so you'll see a lot of team members out there. We're doing sort of a hot dog bar for the team members. So if you see an influx of team members, please make sure, as you always do so well, to express your appreciation to our team members. And thank them for the wonderful work that they do, and tell them to enjoy their hot dogs. And then a little later this afternoon as well, I think we are putting together a little happy hour. It was sort of up in the air whether or not we were going to do it, but I think we are going to have John doesn't know this yet. John's going to be joining us for happy hour.
I have never vetoed a happy hour, just FYI.
At I think at about 4:30 in the game lounge. So if you're interested,
wait a minute, 4:30 happy hour. Boy, it's good to be retired.
So if you're interested and available, stop by and say hello. Couple of other just quick announcements. Some of you may have seen some storage containers out in the parking lot, and some other equipment and supplies that are out there. That is one, all of the location is actually going to move slightly. But that is some of the equipment and materials that will be needed for the solar project. So we are indeed moving forward with the solar project. We don't have an exact timeline of when the construction will actually start, but we're working on getting all of the materials and everything set up and ready to go. And so you'll see more activity over the course of the next few weeks, but no construction, actual construction will start before we give you advance notice. So we're excited for that. That's going to be a huge benefit for the community and for the planet. So that that was the one big thing I wanted to make sure to mention. And I'll turn it over to you, John.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Bradley. And again, good afternoon. Great to be with all of you. This is my listening tour, so I don't have a lot of comments. I'm really here to listen and hear from all of you. I'll respond as I can to various questions and concerns. I'll make just a couple of fairly brief introductory comments. We just closed our second quarter for the year. So I can tell you that we've had probably the best Q1 and Q2 as a company that we've had in my 14 years here. So we've had a very, very good first half of the year. We have very strong entrance fee generation, which tells me that the market is still very responsive to community living and to moving into communities. So the market, despite high interest rates, is still remain very robust for the organization. That is obviously great news. The staff is continuing to pay a lot of attention to our operating efficiency to make sure that we operate profitably and sustainably. Linda, thank you so much. Appreciate that. And our operating margins are very strong as an organization. That is obviously important for a lot of different reasons, including what I just mentioned, which is I am anticipating still some turbulence ahead in the next 12 to 18 months that is going to continue to put some pressure and cause us to face some headwinds with respect to labor and inflation. We've seen that in the past year. I will say generally that we've seen some easing of the price increases that we were seeing a year ago. I think you're probably seeing that in the stores as well. So we're not seeing quite the crazy increases in pricing that we were seeing a year ago. We're seeing some easing to the labor market. So it's not quite as crazy a labor market as it was 6 to 12 months ago, but I would say it's still nowhere near what I would think of as a normalized labor market. So we're still anticipating some challenges on that front. But the good news is we're very well positioned to stand up to those challenges. The other thing I would say is that in my travels around the country and from various boards I sit on that serve our field, not everyone is positioned in a great spot today. So you tend to have organizations like Human Good that are doing well, that are well positioned, that are stable and highly performing. We just got our Fitch ratings review for the California Obligated Group. That remains an A- stable outlook rating. That is very good news for our organization. So organizations tend to fall into one of two camps today, either kind of highly performing, stable, and strong, or fairly significantly stressed and fairly vulnerable. And I'm seeing quite a lot of that across the country. Single sites continue to struggle most of all, but there are also any number of systems that are struggling. And so that's something we keep an eye on because that relates to, kind of the industry attractiveness and industry reputation. So, I'm talking with colleagues from across the country on what we can do to help organizations, not financially, but how we can help organizations who are struggling hold on, meet their obligations, and or get restructured, hopefully without going through the bankruptcy process. So again, I think there's a fairly widespread expectation in the industry for some headwinds in the next 12 to 24 months, but we're very, very well positioned organizationally to stand up to those. The other general comment I'll make is when I mention this to the board all the time, when I look at our team, everything from, our community center, support center leadership teams to our community leadership teams, we're in as strong a place as I think I've seen in years, both with respect to talent and with respect to culture. So generally, the teams are in a good place with a few specific challenges, which I think we're probably going to talk about here in a little bit. So we'll address those. But overall, the story is we're facing some challenges. We know that we're always facing challenges, but we're very, very well positioned to stand up to those challenges and push through them. So with that, I will turn it over to all of you for questions or comments. Again, I'll respond where I can, and where I can't, I'll tell you why I can't.
Sir, Paul Barish, 16-year resident here. And my question for you is, during COVID, we got some help from the federal government. It wasn't directly visible, but it kept prices from going up. Now we're getting some help from the federal government with funding or some kind of relief for the solar and climate. Could you comment about federal government from the life plan community interaction and from the human good interaction?
Yeah, so you're right. We got from the federal government, we got significant support coming through COVID. And for us, as well as for almost every other business, that support was essential to getting through that time with the unique cost and labor pressures we had, specifically around unanticipated expenses for COVID related items. So we got significant support for the last few years for some of that. Most of that has now trailed away. And so the remaining built-in expenses for managing kind of what I'll call the post-COVID is now just built into our core operating budget numbers. We are getting support for the solar. So we continue to, where we find programs that allow us to undertake initiatives without putting the burden of those initiatives on residents, we're looking to expand and take advantage of those quickly. So we're doing that with solar as well as some other sustainability initiatives around the company. And again, we're always looking for and evaluating different programs to see how they can benefit our communities. The one area of concern I have is that I'm not sure the federal government, with respect to Medicare and Medicaid, which is Medi-Cal here in California, with respect to Medicare reimbursement, I think the federal government is starting to pull back on some of their adjustments they made during COVID and pulling rates back a little bit. And that concerns me because we're not seeing any relief in terms of the salaries we're having to pay. So it's not like salaries went up and then they're settling back down. When I say that things have slowed down, we're not seeing the increases in salaries that we were seeing a year ago, but they're certainly not coming back down. And so I'm a little concerned that the government, for example, and I think Medicaid is actually pulling back reimbursements a little bit. And I think that's a really problematic move. And it's something we're working with our state and national association to push back on hard.
Okay, John, Linda Sampson. I'm going to say to you something I said to Bradley the other day, and that's that we had the survey recently, and overall throughout Human Good, there's a great deal of resident satisfaction with the communities. People love living in the Human Good communities. They love the staff. They get good care here. They just don't want to eat here. And it's throughout Human Good. And we're at the bottom of the pile, so we probably feel it most acutely, but it is just not right. So I want to know what you think about that.
You hear an alarm going off for the dryer somewhere? So I'll say what I can. First of all, I hear the concerns, and I'm sure I'll hear more. And I want people who want to voice more concerns to feel completely free to voice those and understand we're going to hear them. James is going to record them, and we're going to take those back. I guess what I can start with, Linda, is saying we're well aware of some of the challenges and the unique particular challenges you're experiencing at the terraces. So we're working with our partners to address those in a timely way and make sure that we get things on track in an appropriate way. And then we're also looking at that issue across the human goods system to understand what is the right long-term way to address dining and nutrition across the organization. We don't have any decisions. We don't have any preconditions going into that, but we're well aware of what the situation is. I always read the surveys. You would hope and think I would. I also read every single comment that comes through. That takes a little while, but I do read those. I will say, if you wrote an individual comment, don't test me on that because I don't remember them. But what I read them for are looking for the broad trends, right? I look for, am I seeing broad themes that come through? And certainly dining and nutrition is one of the themes where there's not satisfactory levels of engagement. So, and I'm sorry, I know this sounds a little circumspect. I apologize for that, but we're working on it. Well, it means that we're evaluating everything from working with Compass and Morrison, our current providers, that ultimately, as that contract turns over, we'll look at alternative providers. That's just part of our due diligence and good management as a company. We'll evaluate whether we want to run a program in-house. That comes with its own pros and cons. One of the reasons that we selected Morrison is they have access to resources far beyond what we would have. We're a big system in the senior housing field. We're not a big system in the food purchasing field. And so as we evaluate, those are three broad options, right? You stick with your current provider and work with them to fix the hiccups. You switch to another provider, but I'll tell you just candidly, I don't know that that's going to get us anything more than just a different provider with the same issues. Or you evaluate, do you want to run a program in-house? And again, that comes with its own very unique set of challenges. So it's something we're going to very carefully look at. We will engage with residents and with team members as we make a thoughtful decision. Nothing will be done without thinking it through carefully, but we're well aware that quality and satisfaction levels aren't where we want them. And so the question is, can we work with an existing provider to get them higher? Do you go to someone else to get them higher? Can we get them higher doing it on our own?
Oh, hi. I have the mic, I guess. I guess my question is, and I'm fairly new here. I've only been here a couple of minutes, but is it possible to have like a resident council that might help with deciding on some food options or some other ideas that we can bring to Morrison and
That is a great question. Thank you for asking it. And we have here at the community, and I don't know if this is sort of what you had in mind or if this would meet that need. Within the resident council, we have various committees. Flo, how many committees do we have now? At least 12 or so committees. One of those committees is the dining committee. And Susan Shaw is our chair, going on 5 years as chair of the dining committee, and works tirelessly on behalf of the residents and in collaboration.
Is Susan here?
Yes. Right in the
Well,
back.
I'll tell you, you deserve a round of applause. That's you couldn't pay me to sit on that committee.
In all sincerity, though, Susan has done a wonderful job. Don't give her any ideas, John. But Susan actually, throughout a lot of transitions that we've had in our dining services team, Susan has been there the whole time, working with our dining services team on behalf of the residents to find ways that we can here at the community level make changes and improvements to our dining program. So if I don't know what the status is of the dining committee, but if you'd like to know more about the dining committee, Susan Shaw is your person.
And that is a really important element to how we design a program and try to respond to the needs and wishes of our various resident populations. And as you can imagine, with 21 retirement communities, we've got 21 different and desirably different programs. They're responding to different communities in different locations. And so this is not a one size fits all program, and those dining committees are a very important part of how we run our local programs.
So one of my questions to you earlier today was when the Morrison contract is up and what's the process? Why is that decision about what to do about working with them made from outside our community, and how are our needs being met and taken care of?
So I don't have the date on the turn of the contract. We'll unless someone has it. I don't. We'll get back to you with that. One thing we want is you want a master solution to various programs for all kinds of reasons, including getting purchasing power with an organization. Having said that, you need a local program that is responsive to the needs of a local community. And any one of the big providers should be able to do that. So I don't know when the date of the turn of the contract is, and I don't want you to read anything into this more than at the turn of any significant contract for the organization, we would always do a review before we would re-up a contract. And we do that in conversation with our various communities and residents to get feedback to make sure that we get the right contracts in place. It's a mostly, and I say mostly, nationwide contract.
Hi, John. I sat at lunch today with another couple, my husband and I did, and I'm the only one that ordered the moussaka, which I thought was fabulous. And I mentioned to this other couple, the chances are in our growing up, what her family grew up with in her kitchen is nothing like what I grew up with in my kitchen. So that's a real dilemma, trying to satisfy people whose kitchens were different foods. I'm Mediterranean, so I had a lot of Greek food. The moussaka was delicious. I'm not that unhappy with the food. I guess I'm in that minority. There are times when I don't like it. It's not what I really want, but all in all, I'm not all that unhappy with it here.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. And what I don't want to do is feel like anyone needs to turn this into a vote of who's happy or not. I appreciate the comment because there's not just uniform unhappiness. And I had the same lunch and actually thought it was delicious. So, but you also raise a really important point, which is, look around the room and find the meatloaf dish that everybody is going to agree on, or the spaghetti preparation, or the lasagna preparation, or the chicken cutlet preparation. I've often said, and please understand, I don't mean this in any dismissive way. The one area of the company you will never, ever find me working in is dining services. For just that reason. Can you imagine how hard it is to satisfy the palates of 200 people who enjoy food? I love food, and I eat a very internationally varied diet as so many people do. And so I don't say this as an excuse or to be dismissive at all, but it's a really hard thing to pull off without going broke. So we're well aware of that. I'm well aware that not everybody's dissatisfied, and even people who are dissatisfied aren't dissatisfied with every single meal or every single experience. But broadly speaking, we have a gap between overall acceptable performance and where we are today. And by the way, I should point out in fairness that the president of Morrison has reached out to me to say, I know we've got gaps in areas where we're not performing to your expectations. and, tell me what we need to do to get things on track. So they have been, they've tried to be responsive as well.
Yeah, are all of the communities served by Compass Morrison? And if not, can we try some other outfit? Are we tied into having all communities covered by Morrison?
Well, right now, all communities are not tied into Morrison. Our Human Good East communities use Unidyne. We have Terraces of Boise, which is self-managed, so that's run in-house. I think we have one or two other communities that either go in-house or use somebody else. So no, you don't necessarily have to have everybody on one contract. And even if you have one contract, you don't have everybody on the same program. So, I mean, it's kind of like going to a Marriott hotel. You can say we got a contract with Marriott, but that can be everything from Marriott to Marriott high-end, middle, lower grade. So it's even there. It's not necessarily uniform. And no, we don't necessarily, as we evaluate the future, we don't necessarily have to have everybody on the same contract. It may be that we evaluate this and decide, yeah, you know what, in this geography, this is a better provider, or in this geography, we should be self-operated. But in general, one of the advantages we have of our size, one of the reasons we are financially successful and stable is where you can have larger contracts in place. You want to take advantage of that. And mostly it's about purchasing power. The purchasing power is really where this gets impacted.
I'm Susan Kuykendall, and we're relatively new to the community. In fairness, I should tell you, I worked in a retirement community and worked in the dining area for 8 years.
Where was that? Do you mind saying,
Yes,
Susan?
it's Carlton Willard in Bedford, Mass. You might know Barbara Doyle.
Oh, I do.
I'm sure you do. A dear friend of mine. Anyway, a comment that we frequently hear is that part of the problem here is that the kitchen is woefully inadequate, that it is small. I'm well aware because we had the same situation of serving both the nursing center and the independent residents out of the same kitchen, which is horrible, but you're stuck with it. So if the kitchen is so inadequate that the equipment I heard is from the time that the place was built, I don't know if that's true. And probably the floor plan is poor. Do you have any kind of a program or any kind of a service that comes out, evaluates the efficiency of the kitchen itself in terms of placement of material, et cetera? And do you have any kind of budget for making this place better? Because every time I try to have a really substantive conversation, it falls back on the kitchen is inadequate.
Yeah, and the short answer to your question is yes. There are any number of resources to come out and evaluate the very things you just articulated. I'll be honest. I think that while that may be part of the solution, I frankly don't buy it as a big part of the problem. Yes, I think kitchen design matters, but the kitchen was designed 30 years ago. It's worked more successfully 5 years ago, perhaps, than it was today. So I think there's something about kitchen design and having the right equipment. I agree with that, but I also think that's occasionally a convenient excuse.
Well, in some instances, I think that because of the time of 30 years, there are certain foods that are more prevalent, more desirable, more frequently requested. For example, a gas grill versus a flat plate. I don't think we have anything like that here, because when we have anything that's grilled, even if it says it's grilled on a grill and they serve it from a grill outdoors, there are 0 grill marks on anything. The bratwurst comes straight out of a pot. The chicken comes straight out of an oven. There's no grilling here. Not what you consider grilling by today's standards.
Yeah,
So
well,
I think-
grilling meaning it comes off a grill.
Off
That
a
would be
grill.
one base expectation I would
Exactly.
have. If you call it grilled. So in that case, yes, there maybe there's a piece of equipment we're missing.
But like, do you have large soup pots? Technology's changed a lot. Do you have the fast freeze options? I just.
Yeah, all good questions. And again, there may be some of that can be improved. and that's fine. And we've certainly got capital budgets to look at that. It's something we will look at. And it's something you're always kind of adding to and reinventing. But I also look back at cooking, and I think people are committed to quality and to an experience, find a way to get it delivered.
Thank you.
And we're going to try to not repeat people asking questions just until we get through audience, make sure that everyone has a chance to raise their hand.
I think part of the problem, the food itself aside, I think part of the problem is that we went through COVID and people were very, very understanding about what happened during COVID. But then we lost our dining service manager and our chef. And we had several dining service managers, temporary, who were more than inadequate. And they were eventually replaced. We've had a series of sous chefs, temporary chefs, and there has been no consistency in the kitchen. There was a feeling that Morrison perhaps did not step up to the plate as soon or as adequately as they should have, and did not support us in our need. And a lot of the negative feeling about Morrison comes from that. We still have inconsistencies in the kitchen, as you know, you will. We still do not have an executive chef. We know the problems with finding chefs and keeping them. But there is the feeling that Morrison is not supporting us. I'm sure that the contract, they're paid well. We know we pay for living here, and there are high expectations for what we should receive. And people feel that we are not getting what we should receive. And I think a lot of the negativity comes from that.
And thank you for that comment. I think you summed up a lot of what I've been hearing, and I think that's a good way to I don't say wrap it up, meaning I'm not going to take more comments on this. That's fine, but I think you really summed up the core issue, right? You've got a challenge. Has someone stepped up to that challenge in a timely way, in a real way, and have they addressed it in an acceptable way? And I think the sense is that in this case, Morrison hasn't stepped up fast enough to address some of the issues. By the way, when I talked to Dan, who's the CEO who called me, that's one of the comments I'll share. Is here's the perception is you didn't step up when first asked, and you get a lot of grace when you're trying, even if you fall short. But if people perceive you're not trying or not responsive, you don't get so much grace. And I'll share that comment. The one thing I will say with respect to hanging on to team members, and please understand this is not intended as an excuse in any way, but it is the reality we're facing. Is I think I read, was it this morning? I read the median home value here is like $4.2 million. Now, the good news is it's down from 4.6. So an executive chef, for whatever we pay an executive chef, which will be a competitive wage for that position, is probably living 2 hours away. And at some point, they're driving past 2 hours of other opportunities. And again, please hear, I don't mean that as some kind of excuse or a dismissal, but it's a reality that we're facing is, and we see this in food service, we see it with CNAs, we see it with any of our hourly team members. You can't recruit locally because nobody can afford to live locally. That is a much broader problem that we've got to find a solution for. When you look, for example, at a city like San Francisco, and why is San Francisco in trouble? I could talk for a long time about why they're in trouble, in my opinion. But one of it is you can't run a city without a service economy class. You can't run a city where your fire workers and teachers and street sweepers can't afford to live anywhere near their jobs. It doesn't work. And so that's just an economic reality we have to be cognizant of, and we have to find a solution for if we're going to attract and retain the talent we need to deliver the quality we expect. I just followed the microphone.
Okay, Tom Boyce. I've been here for 2 years. We enjoyed the dining experience, even though the food has some challenges, but the wait staff and everybody makes it a really good experience, particularly sitting down with another community couple or member and getting acquainted. So it is a good experience to dine here. The comment I wanted to make was, I see out of the 21 facilities, 2 scored 78% positive rate, while the other 19 or so are all under 50%. What can we learn from Boise and Phoenix, or you can learn from Boise and Phoenix and pass on to us so we can get whatever magic they're doing applied right here?
We're looking at that, understand they're 2 very different markets. And I think that's part of why you see some of the disparities in the experience. So they're not dealing with some of the same challenges. But to your point, we're evaluating both of those programs to understand what's the magic sauce, what makes it different. And it's interesting because part of it, this is such an interesting business because part of it comes to the relationships people have. When you know the folks that you just mentioned, the relationships you have with the team members, those relationships actually matter a lot to the overall experience. So in some communities where you've got folks who are masters at managing that relationship, and I'll call it the schmoozing, and I don't say that dismissively, it's important. It's part of why we enjoy an experience. We tend to see higher scores. So the hospitality component may not be quite as important as just the food component alone, but it's a really critically important component. And I think in both of those communities, you would find a really high degree of that pure hospitality in addition to perhaps the way the program itself is run. So we're looking at all of that, and believe me, we're trying to learn and apply lessons anywhere we can.
I have a question, and have you really looked upon the economy of going to a company like Morrison compared to have a local one? Because with Morrison, you add on lots of overhead. First overhead at Morrison, and then overhead at the places they take their food. And those places has overhead from where they take their food, which has overhead for where they taking for food. Dos Gatos High School made the experiment this year. They fired the big organization who has fed the kids food which they didn't eat. And some local good chef came in and took over. It turned out that suddenly the kids were standing in queue line to come in and eat. And the cost, total cost, and the chef bought locally, and the total cost, they served 900 meals a day. Total cost was less than we used the big corporation.
Yeah, so that's a great comment. Thank you for that. And when I said earlier that we're going to evaluate the entire program, that's part of what we try to calculate in. I will say that companies like Morrison, Compass, Sodexo, Thomas Cuisine, one of the really significant advantages they have, and it is significant, is purchasing power of supplies. I mean, it's really significant. Now, to your point, though, they also have layers of overhead that absorb some of those efficiencies. So if we believe we can get higher quality consistently delivered and keep that team in place better than some of our competitors can do, I'm not quite sure how we do that, at the same or lower cost, we'll obviously make that decision. So that is going to be part of our calculus. And we want to look at those lessons where other people have done that to determine if we can replicate on a consistent basis that experience.
Hello. I guess, oh, this is fun. There are 2 things that you mentioned that I'd like to address. One, the difficulty of finding executive chef because of the high cost of living here. I'm wondering if there's been any effort to hire chefs who live here locally. For example, it's been successful that we have a director of dining services, Paul, who was working in this area prior to coming here. There are several very high quality restaurants that are turning to less demanding approaches, whose executive chefs will be looking for something else someplace else. But they could be encouraged to work here, which would mean not going into the difficulties of moving. I'm wondering if that opportunity has been checked out or forgotten.
Well, so let me quickly respond to that and don't lose your second question. The short answer is I hope so. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not out talking to executive chefs, but I'll tell you, when I'm out in the field, when I run across somebody I think is a great human good team member, I'm constantly handing out my card with my cell number on it saying, I know you have a good career where you are, but you can have an even better career working for human good. And I recruit people constantly. And that means in Starbucks, when I'm out doing speeches in Florida, anywhere I am, I'm always recruiting. And I would hope that any of our folks are doing the same thing.
Well, maybe we need you to help us find that executive chef.
I'll do my best. If I run across a great executive chef, I promise I'll hand out my card.
Good thinking. The other thing I'm wondering is this, within the contract that you have, the larger contract with Morrison, could there be any area that defines the quality of food that they must use? In other words, you can go to different markets here and get A grade meat in one and B and C in another. I think one of the biggest problems that has occurred within the year and a half that I've lived here is I feel that it's not the ability of the cooks to do a good job, but that some of the quality of the product has diminished. I'm just wondering if that is part of your contract.
So the short answer to that is I don't know, actually, if there are quality parameters on what grade of meat, for example, we use, what size egg we use. It wouldn't surprise me if that were true. I just don't know. And yes, the answer is it can certainly be written into a contract. Whether the quality of goods used has changed in the past 2 years, I don't know. It's hard. It's just hard for me to answer that. And I will say, if you go back to some of the inflation we saw in the last 24 months, with eggs going up 84% and meat going up 42%, might they have at the same price level had to drop a level in quality? Possibly. I don't know that. That's just a guess on my part. So I really don't know. But sure, we can write quality standards into a contract. And probably will in the next one, if we haven't already.
Good afternoon. Obviously, we all have different tastes. On the whole, I think the menus have been pretty good. The food has been pretty tasty. I know that you can't add salt because there are people who shouldn't have salt, low fat. The challenges are enormous. And I also am glad not to be working in the dining services. And I think the team here is fabulous. What I do not understand is why the food is consistently lukewarm, that we do not get hot food. And that makes a huge difference to how it tastes and our perception of what we're eating changes if you've got a cold piece of meat or a cold piece of fish as opposed to a hot food. So I think there are some things that can be upgraded, changed very easily, very quickly, not high cost, and that would make a huge difference to our perception.
I can speak to that a little bit because I think that's a great comment. And I think that actually ties back in to Susan's comment earlier about equipment and workflows. And I can share that I saw Paul step in a couple minutes ago, but I think he quickly backed out slowly.
Maybe he's getting my laundry.
Maybe. But Paul and I have been in conversation, and we are exploring some equipment changes and upgrades that will are intended to address that issue specifically. So that is something that with a few minor changes, I think we can see some improvement.
But that's a great comment because it's one of those things that you would hope could be relatively easily fixed in most circumstances. Now, there may be times when for some reason something sits longer than it should, but by and large, it comes off the grill or the griddle hot. Well, it's hot at some point. So it's just a matter of getting it to the table.
Hi, Joe.
Sharon.
I just for the new members here, just to let you know that you are welcome to come to the dining committee meeting anytime. You don't have to be a member. You can come as a guest and still give your opinion. And also to the residents council, if you have suggestions that you want to make about the entire community. My main question.
Well, I thought that was your question, Sharon.
In the past, we were talking about possibility of helping the team members get to work because they cannot live in Los Gatos. And part of the conversation was around helping with housing, but the biggest part was busing, just like Google and Facebook do for their employees. Have we considered having several stops in San Jose or Morgan Hill and bringing the team members in that have to travel for I don't know how long in order to get to work?
I can share some comments about that, and it's a very, very, very good point. Christy, who was running right there a few years ago, and it's probably time to revisit this. A few years ago, Christy worked diligently to map out the addresses of all of our team members with the intention of trying to figure out, is there a way that we could do exactly as you suggest? When we went through that process, in a perfect world, right, we would have highly centralized locations where there's a lot of team members and a lot of those team members work the same or similar schedules. So that logistically, it would make sense to do that. At that point, it just, there just wasn't a way to do it with the location of where the team members were living, considering the 3 different shifts and considering different departments that have different schedules. But as I said, that was probably 3, maybe longer years ago now. And things have changed. And I know a lot of team members have moved significantly further out even since then. So that is something that Christy and I can work together and revisit that to see if there's a way to do that. That's a good point. And I would have assumed at some point, maybe in a conversation like this, we had let people know, but maybe not, or maybe not well enough, or but
well, now you know why I
point
bring
taken.
James with me to every meeting.
Yeah, we need a James.
But it is a good point about the communication. And I will say that more broadly, Sharon, to the question you were raising, we have corporately evaluated because we operate in some very high cost areas. I mean, you look at Seattle, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, San Diego in particular, those areas are just tremendously high cost areas. We have a community, as you all know, White Sands of La Jolla, that sits on the beach. The beautiful thing is it sits on the beach. The not so beautiful thing is nobody can get there to work there. They have to drive over the hill, everybody. And it's a traffic nightmare. It takes a lot of time, and they drive past 25 other jobs that when someone offers them $1 an hour more, they pull off the exit and go to work. So we've looked corporately at all kinds of ideas from can we build workforce housing? Can we partner with communities to house team members? And the short story is we have not found an economically viable way to address housing costs for team members in a way that would affect employment. We're still looking at that, and we're always open to ideas. We just haven't found a solution.
I'm sort of like an end user, and I've only been here for about okay.
There you go.
I'm sort of an end user, and I've only been here for about 2.5 weeks. But one of the things that amuses me is when it says fish of the day. Now, every day, the fish of the day is salmon. Now, I've heard that there's other kinds of fish. There's flounder, and there's cod, and there's tilapia, but somehow they're not the fish of the day. And it seems in the menu is like boring. And it's like, okay, I mean, it's not that it's bad, it's just boring. And how many times do I have to eat a hot dog just to get something different? And so it's not about our cost, it's a matter of having a little ingenuity in terms of varying things off a little bit so that you're not bored to come to the dining room.
Well, that's a great comment. We can share, Bradley can share it with the team about, whether there are ways to, again, fish of the day, probably shouldn't be the exact same fish every single day, the catch of the day. Although apparently they're catching a lot of salmon. Interesting. I go to a little restaurant near where I live, and their soup of the day has been tomato bisque every day for the last 4 years. And I know the owner, and I said, are you ever going to change the soup of the day? And he said, well, no. And I said, well, why would you do that? He said, well, no one orders the soup anyway. What kind of answer is that? So we'll look into the catch of the day and see if we can use a different lure and bring something else in.
Hi, John. Welcome. We spoke and hugged earlier. Anyway, I am with everyone regarding the dining room and the food. But I do want to bring something else up, and that is the security here, the safety of the residents. There are some things that have not been done that can really be easy fixes. And I don't mean to be critical by any means, it's just to be brought up. But there are steps that could use some yellow marking so people don't fall. I mean, there's simple things. And Bradley knows about one thing that I was talking about just recently. We have new letters on the buildings, but they're smaller than what we had. So, I mean, Bradley knows.
He did mention that.
Yeah, that was me.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
Yeah, no, I feel it's important. I got to be honest about it. But I really think we need something that will show up at night too for our emergency services. I mean, there are a lot of little things that I think we as residents should bring up to Bradley and anyone else so we can all be safe. No matter what, just, and the signage has decreased in size. And we have a lot of people who have macular degeneration here, and we need to fix that too. That's an easy fix, I think. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for the comments, Bradley. I'll let you speak to the safety.
Yeah.
I'll wash my hands of the answer.
No, very, very good points. And with respect to the signage, we are, there's some things that went well with the signage project. So there's some things that didn't go as we would have hoped. One of them being some of the signs, particularly the building letters, being exceptionally smaller than anticipated. So Vincent, who, congratulations, they had their baby. Vincent was working with our partner for the signage project up until the day that he had to rush off to the hospital on preparing a list of everything that needs to be fixed or changed or added with respect to signage. I have sort of picked up some of those conversations with the signage company, and it is a work in progress. One of the most significant ones being the building letter signs. With respect to other safety measures, it's a very good point. And I will have to put some thought into the best approach to be able to figure out, put together a list of these are all of the high priority items. But maybe you and I can connect on that and then we can strategize together.
It sounds like you have a new chair for the safety committee.
Flo, add that to your committee roster.
Maybe it's an ad hoc committee, but you know, it's actually an important point. And it's one of those areas where having Bradley design solutions is not the same as having residents weigh in and design solutions. And so I think that's where we need the input. And there are probably things you're well aware of that, you know, he and we might never think about.
Could you do the contract with the dining, back to dining, for a year instead of doing it for 3 years? That's a long time out to get with somebody all the time. I might not be here in 3 years. Who knows?
Well, the way things are going, I might not be here in 3 years. No, I think, yes, I hear your point. For lots of reasons, obviously, large organizations like that don't like to sign 1-year contracts. But you know, what they like is not necessarily relevant to what I want. So yeah, that's something we might explore, as well as whether a shorter contract actually keeps people more responsive. So that might be part of what we explore as we look at our options in the next 6 to 12 months.
I have a question. Is that okay?
Well, sure.
So John, and we're coming up on the hour, but I think it would be interesting. You've been making tours around other communities within the organization. I think it'd be interesting to hear what are some of the themes. Obviously, dining is a theme here. I would imagine it's a theme other areas as well. But if there's sort of anything that you've noticed, themes or things that have stood out as you've gone and toured other communities.
You know, there are a couple of things. Dining's always a theme. I mean, I've been in this business now for almost 30 years, and this will shock you, but dining shows up in every meeting I've ever done about resident satisfaction. And that's not surprising. Dining's a big part of the satisfaction we all get from our day. Food is important to us. And so that's just always been part of the conversation. And it depends on the community. Some are happy or some are less happy. So there's some consistency to it, but not a great deal. I get a lot of comments about mental health coming up, the mental health of residents having come through COVID and the shutdown, and all the issues we all experience around aging. And I get a lot of questions around the mental health for team members who have also been under enormous stress and strain the last few years, and you know, kind of what we're doing to bring resources to address mental health. And then more broadly, I'm seeing conversations around inclusion and what that means. And it's been actually both interesting and I'll say a little bit heartening as I've been around having conversations, and I often get letters from residents before I show up in a community. And the same issues that you see playing out nationally around every issue you can imagine, specifically around inclusion. You see those same issues being raised and thought through at the communities. Here's what I think has made my experience a little different. As I've heard from residents and I've watched the interaction between residents and team members in the conversations, those conversations have been respectful and open in a way that I don't see played out nationally very often. And that really actually gives me hope that we don't need to all agree, but we do need to be able to engage with one another in a respectful and welcoming way. And so I've seen so far, knock on wood, I hope this continues, but I've seen a real receptivity to honest, constructive conversation around issues around inclusion. And I guess when I hear the bagpipes, is that my laundry? Is that so inclusion has been one of the big issues that I've heard on the listening tour. And again, that's not a surprise. And I hope, because there's not an answer to that as much as a process of having honest conversation with people around those issues. And I hope that can continue.
Thank you for sharing that. I know and I think I can speak on behalf of the community that we appreciate the organization's efforts to be at the forefront of creating inclusive communities where everyone feels safe and comfortable, and safe and comfortable engaging in dialogue, I think is critical. We are past 2:15 by 2.5 minutes. We have to start serving hot dogs to the team members in less than 15 minutes, and you've got some laundry to retrieve. Do you have
I hope
any
it's dry.
final parting words before we wrap, John? And
No.
thank you so much for being here.
My final parting words, besides instead of catch of the day, you can now go get a hot dog on your way out of the room. I thank you for the welcome you give me when I visit. I love being in our communities. I love the dialogue and conversation. Thank you again for a respectful and I think really candid conversation. I appreciate that. It is good from my standpoint simply to be back in our communities. This is why most of us get into this work. So I look forward to being here again very soon. I tend to just kind of rotate my way around and try to stay in touch, but I appreciate the warm welcome I'm always given. I appreciate the feedback that has been shared with me, the feedback that was shared with me in advance of this meeting, and just know that we, all of us in leadership, take these conversations and that feedback very seriously, and we work very hard to make sure that the experience you get at the terraces matches your reasonable expectation at the terraces. So thank you again. Thank you for sitting for an hour. I know these chairs have about an hour seat limit to them, so I appreciate your patience in the conversation.